Hey everybody, Chance Brills here. Oh, and I messed up my own intro because I was somewhere else. Welcome back to the collective. And there's Chris right there. Look
Wow.
at that. Chris, how's it going, buddy?
Good. How you doing?
Good. He jumps in right at the last second as we went live. I love it. So I just want to let everybody know we're going to be continuing our talks on Resilience Week. And while I'm going over this, I want everybody to make sure hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all that awesome stuff. That way you get your email every day that we go live, which is of course every day. We are going to be discussing personal accountability. But before we get into any of that, I do want to hit on this. Chris, you're a new face, so can you give us a 30, 45-second little blurb on who you are, where you come from, all that good stuff, and then we'll dive into the full extent of the conversation.
Yep. My name is Chris Kegg. I hail from Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, so it's in between Philadelphia and Harrisburg.
Oh, right on. And can you give us a little bit of history and a little note on the I Am Able Foundation as well?
Yep. So I was a U.S. Marine back when I was 17 years old, and when I was 21, I developed a degenerative nerve condition, and my Marine Corps career was done. So I had to get out. When I got out, I really just believed in the benefits of being active, and I wanted to try to provide that same opportunity for everybody else who didn't have the opportunities, like who have cognitive or physical disabilities. So 2007, I started the I Am Able Foundation.
Outstanding.
Awesome.
And yeah, this is why I want to talk personal accountability too. Is the field that I have here is fantastic to discuss this particular topic. Now, if y'all have any questions or comments, by all means, put them up in the comment section here. We'll be able to discuss them as we go along. So let's get the discussion started. Unless you guys got some thoughts or questions before we dive right in.
Just hello to the two Chris's, which I'm sure will become confusing at some point in this podcast.
100%. 100%. We might just have, I might just have to call, you know what, I'm just going to say Lee. That way we'll keep it militaristic. Lee and maybe Lee and Cag. There we go. We'll take Chris right out of the way.
Sounds like a
Nobody calls me Chris.
B grade Hollywood movie. No?
There you go, right? Yeah, I like it. It could be on the Commando 2 posters, right?
Maybe with a handshake.
Yeah, yes, with the midair. Yes, 100%. So today we're talking personal accountability, and I'm going to give a quick little summarization / definition to kind of focus up the topic. So here goes. Personal accountability refers to the belief that one is fully responsible for their actions and consequences. It is a choice, mindset, and expression of integrity that can and should be learned. Although it is not just a mindset, but also a skill set that requires one to be fully responsible for their actions and thoughts. And being accountable means improving one's self-esteem and self-empowerment, which I think is awesome because the reason I wanted to hit both of those points was one is a belief / mindset, but there's also the skill set that works with it as well. So let's go around the table and we'll hit on what your thoughts are on what personal accountability is, and then we can go from there. Chris, Lee, let's start with you.
That's fair. Yeah, personal accountability. I think it's huge, and something I tell a lot of the folks I work with is wherever they are in life is entirely their fault, good or bad. But the good news about that is they also get to be the hero of their own story. That means that every action they take throughout their life can lead them to the life they want or the life they didn't plan for. So it's kind of all on them. And the more they can break down those long-term goals into daily habits and actions, I think that's what leads you to success. So that's my little take.
Cag, what do you think?
I actually totally echo what he just said. I think we're all responsible for making sure that we're personally accountable for all of our actions and all the things that we have to account for. Excuse me. And it's like, I think it's definitely a good thing to look at as a leader, as somebody who can just admit when they're wrong, make mistakes, and do the things they need to do to correct them. But I think personal accountability is very important.
Mm-hmm. John, what do you think?
Well, I agree with the two Chris's, and I think that it's one thing to agree with what they just said, but it's an entirely different thing to understand what they just said. And so I think the only way that you can understand what was just said by those two gentlemen is to be in the game of your own personal accountability, which is not something you're born with, by the way. That's a learned response. That is a learned practice. It's a skill that needs to be developed over time so that you can get better at it, to better understand what those two fellas just said. So I agree with their comments.
I feel like I'm in a bit of an echo chamber here. But no, the question that I have is, accountability is a good thing. We've hit on that right away, but how does personal accountability tie into personal resilience? Like if you are an accountable person, how does that tie into when things go sideways and like everything starts to fall apart on you? Sean, I'm gonna start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. So I think that you're never going to develop personal accountability until you start taking accountability for your actions. And so if your actions are viewed by yourself as amazing, I mean, if you're dropping all the balls as a juggler and they keep hitting the ground and you think, well, that's just freaking amazing. I'm the world's best juggler. You'll never understand personal accountability. So, and in not understanding personal accountability, you're not developing any resilience. Because if you're just throwing balls around, they're just hitting the deck all the time. How are you developing resiliency in that moment other than bending down to pick them up? So if you want to be a professional juggler and you want to get better at that art, you've got to start critically analyzing your performance. You've got to hold yourself accountable. Every time you fail, you've got to recognize that that's a failure, and you've got to start a course of actions to improve against that failure point. Now, that doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means that you're failing at things. You're failing to produce the outcome that is expected of you by either yourself or someone else. And if you're holding yourself personally accountable in the moment to try to do better, that's creating resilience. Because if you don't hold yourself accountable, who's creating the friction? And friction is required to develop resilience. If you're skating through the world easy peasy lemon squeezy, shrugging your shoulders every time you do something wrong, or you've just kind of skated through life without any friction, you don't understand personal accountability, and you surely aren't resilient. That's my first crack at it.
Okay, what are your thoughts on that?
I just want to go use an example. So for me, and obviously I'll get more into my story, but it's like I have so many people who are counting on me to motivate them and inspire them. And you know what? On a daily basis, I have my struggles, I have my challenges, but it's like I'm accountable to all my people who depend on me to motivate them and to make sure that they're feeling fulfilled. So I am responsible for them. And if I would let them down, that would be a total failure on my part. So it's like I think the accountability and the resilience goes hand in hand.
Lee, anything to add on that?
I think personal accountability is a learned behavior. It's just like riding a bike or learn how to shoot a gun. It requires repetition and it requires practice. And I think one of the best ways to practice that is to surround yourself with people that expect a lot of you. Something I've said for a long time is real friends stab you in the face. So if you aren't meeting the standard, it's the way it was on the teams. And since leaving the Army, I've intentionally surrounded myself with people that do the same thing. But if you're not meeting the standard, you have somebody sit you down and be like, "Hey, man, you better tighten it up, or you're going to have your bags out in the hallway tomorrow morning." So personal accountability, and how does that relate to resilience? I think to learn personal accountability, you need to figure out where it is that you are failing. Kind of like what Sean was saying. If you're juggling and you don't realize you're dropping all the balls, then you still think you're pretty awesome. So you need kind of that external force to say, "Hey, man, you dropped 3 of your balls, pick them up." And then through that learned behavior, it's like, oh, that's what failure looks like. Now I know the behavioral change I need to do to fix it. And resiliency, for me, that resiliency is one of those things that's required long before you need it. It's like one of those things that's like you anticipate life is going to happen and hell's going to show up for breakfast every now and then. And having established a pattern of holding yourself accountable, primarily through at first getting called out by teammates or friends or whatever. When stuff does go sideways, you know how to course correct in your own life, and that's, in my opinion, that's what resiliency is. It's like when stuff doesn't go according to plan, you have the tools now in your toolbox to adjust fire and make the appropriate correction.
Interesting. Sean, you got a point on that?
Just as both Chris's were saying, I think that if you've got to find a way to hold yourself accountable, personally accountable, and to the team is a great proxy. So Chris Lee is holding himself accountable to his teammates who may throw his bags out into the hallway. So we all need people who hold us accountable if we're not holding ourselves accountable. So I'm not suggesting that everyone in the world needs a coach, but a lot of people do. And what does a coach mean? It can be your neighbor who just pops his head over the fence and says, "Bro, your grass is so tall, I can't even see you anymore." There's lots of different ways to hold a person accountable. And there's lots of people to hold us accountable that we don't know. Random strangers can hold us accountable if we've got our mind open to it, if we are not trying to shut down the world around us that's giving us the messages to tighten our act up, get a little bit better at something, stop being such a goof, for lack of a better term. If a person is personally not holding themselves accountable, then and they're not working on being accountable, there's not a magic meteor that hits you in the head when you're 50 and injects some personal accountability into you. There's no magic. We either hold ourselves accountable or the world holds us accountable. And I like the idea of coaches. I know down in the United States, we lived in the United States for 2 years, and of course coaching athletes for 15 years. I had a good sense of the delta or the difference between the U.S. and Canada in respect to coaches. And the U.S. is miles ahead of Canada in respect to how much they value coaching. It is a country that is brought up to some degree on the familiarity with and the appreciation for the abilities of coaching from a young age right through the adult life. But up here in Canada, it is not as strong a message. And so it was easy to coach athletes down in the United States. They would come and seek you. But up here in Canada, it is less so. It is not a culture that strongly understands the benefits of a coach holding you personally accountable. And I feel my U.S. athletes, if I was comparing them against my Canadian athletes, the U.S. athletes had more buy-in initially until my Canadian athletes got to know me to some degree. But I feel that if you can't hold yourself accountable, your next move should be go find a coach. Not even an amazing coach, just a coach to get in the game of someone holding you accountable. And through the process, week, month, year, whatever the case is, you'll eventually find the right coach for you. But don't worry about finding the right coach today. Go find one right now. And eventually you'll find the right coach down the road.
Kag, you got any thoughts on this one?
No, I think all that was said was said.
Roger that. Lee, anything? Any points on that?
I'm trying to. So accountability, it's like one of those things. I can't remember if it was in 12-week year or compound effect, but I read somewhere that accountability is like an interesting term because it's other people can't really hold you accountable. They can remind you of where you're coming up short or something along those lines. But in my opinion, it's really like, all right, what commitments have I made to myself or what commitments have I made to others? And if I'm dropping those standards, if I'm not meeting those commitments, I'm not measuring up. And so the accountability piece is really just like, I don't know, checks and balances of like, am I am I doing what I said I was going to do? And if not, what are the consequences? And like I mentioned before, and Sean touched on it too, is it's a learned behavior. It's not something that you just are born with. I mean, maybe some people are to a higher degree than others, but really it requires repetition, requires reps, and yeah, bringing on a coach or a solid group of guys around you or whatever to hold you to the commitments you've made to yourself or others is I think pretty vital in the whole growth process.
Mm-hmm. Now I got a quick thought before I do that. I just want to remind anybody watching, if you guys got thoughts or comments, actually, I'm going to ask you this question directly. What are you guys' thoughts on personal accountability and how do you apply it in your life? Hit us up in the comments on that one. But the question I had is more to do with kind of what you're saying, Chris, is do you think that personal accountability is grown by external factors? So, and what I mean by that is that how much do you think that culture plays into personal accountability? Because if you're raised in a family that is just completely out to lunch and everything is, well, the universe will just provide, right? Like that type of mindset doesn't lend itself towards personal accountability within that culture. But if you have a really, nose to the grindstone, we're going to be accountable at all times for everything, that culture kind of breeds personal accountability. So I'm just wondering, chicken before the egg kind of question here, which way to go first. So Lee, I'm going to put you up first, but what do you think?
Excellent question. And I think, in my opinion, it begins with like external factors. And I'll give you a quick example. So for a long time, I was struggling just to wake up early. I'd set my alarm for 5:30 or whatever. And man, the covers just felt too good and I just wouldn't wake up. And so I finally had enough, and I called my buddy Brad and I was like, hey dude, if you don't receive a text from me by tomorrow morning at 6, I'm going to send you $100 on Venmo. And he's like, deal. So he was hoping
I want some of that action.
Yeah, right. Well, and so incidentally, I didn't have any trouble waking up anymore because I changed the motivation. So like the pain of staying in bed was greater than the pain of actually getting up. And although it was yesterday or the day before, I stayed up too late. And then instead of snoozing my alarm, I turned it off and I overslept. And so I had to Venmo him $100 and he was stoked. But back to your kind of like culture question, something that I've been doing with my girls is when they're talking about not feeling like putting in 100% effort in schoolwork or sports or whatever, I say, what's your last name? And, my youngest daughter's like, my last name's Lee. And I say, what's that mean then? And well, I got to do my best because it's important to be an individual and pursue things that you're interested in. But I also want to create a culture in my own house that your last name means something. And it's really just one giant experiment for the next, 9 years until she's 18. But I'm hoping that external factor of like, hey, your last name should mean something, and you should take pride in that. I'm hoping that instills in her a little bit more personal accountability. But I do think it kind of begins with that external factor.
Interesting.
I agree. And I have to jump in here because it's dovetailing straight into Chris Lee's point, and hopefully it will give you some sense of you're on the right path. Because just not even a month ago, I was jumping out of a perfectly good airplane with my youngest son. And so he'd been at Operation Pegasus Jump with me last summer, my two boys had. And then this year, my youngest went back with me for a second time. And so his first trip up into the air, he had to do a refresher course, which I did not have to do this year. And so he had to go up in the plane by himself with strangers. I mean, Army friends of mine, but he didn't really know them. So when he got to the ground, I said, well, how did it go? And he said, Dad, I was so nervous. I can't even believe how nervous I was. And I said, well, you explain that to me. And he did this. My teeth were chattering. And I talked to the jump master after the fact and said, how was it? And he said, well, he looked pretty nervous. And I said, okay, thanks. But Keegan was really nervous. But this is what he told me. He said, Dad, I was so nervous, I wasn't sure I was going to jump. But then I remembered who my dad was, and I remembered my last name, and I knew that I was gonna jump because that's what is expected of me, and that's what's expected of the message that we're sending out to the world. And so he did jump based on his last name, based on that's how he's being raised. And so I wouldn't be able to tell that story about his personal accountability unless he'd been externally held accountable within just our own little family unit, and not a finger wagging before he got in the plane like, I expect you to jump. That never has to be said. If he hadn't have jumped, he would have had a good reason for it, and I would have been proud of his decision in that moment as well. And how do I know I would have been proud? Because he's just turned he's up and around 18 years old, and he's a man, and he's being raised the right way. And so I know his personal accountability, both of our boys, for their futures. They'll make the right decisions based on the information they have in front of them, based on the external accountability that they've been taught over their life.
That's a great point. Kag, what do you think?
I tell you what, I strongly agree with everything that's been said. The external influence, I think, is definitely huge, because it's like that one quote: "Pain is temporary, quitting lasts forever." Some people are they're born with it or they learn it, but then there's other people who have not had that mentality where they need to do this stuff because they want to avoid that embarrassment, or they want to avoid that accountability that they're going to get from everybody else. So it's like, I think people need to understand they need to be influenced by people around them.
It's it's such an interesting point too, because you'd think family initially would keep you accountable, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they allow you to do things, and sometimes they it's never exactly the way you want it. But you can really garner your family. You can start to look for, as you said earlier, you start to look for people. Start to look for people that you want to follow along behind, and like, oh, as you said, Sean, when you looked at Ken Murphy and you were like, that guy, that's who I want to resemble, and then just follow in suit with that. Now I got a couple comments here, but I'm just wondering, any other thoughts on anything we've talked about so far? No? Good? Okay. First off, Alan, good afternoon. Good to see you. Always good to see you. Salty Jinx, also good to see you. He says, I think it's as much about habit/culture as it is the individual. And while it can be developed over time, some people are just built for it. But the sooner we learn it, the better. I think this is a great topic, because I don't know how many times I've heard or I've said, man, if only I'd learned this 20 years ago, or, oh, I wish I'd been taught this 15 years ago, or whatever. But do you think perhaps that...
But you were.
That's where I was going to go with that.
Okay.
So, I was going to ask, do you think that it is so much more so that you're just not seeing it at a young age, or perhaps you're not ready to take on those lessons? Or do you think perhaps you have to have some sort of trial to go through? Because I'm going to get into, in a little bit, we're going to get into rites of passage and such. But what do you guys think on that? And do you think it is that we're just not seeing it early enough, or we're just not taught it early enough in life? I'm going to go, Kag, what do you think?
I think we're probably not taught it early enough in life. I mean, I didn't get mine until I was in my 20s. So it's like you said, I wish I would have definitely got it a lot sooner. So it's like, unfortunately, that is something that's not bred into all of us at a young age.
100%. Lee, what do you think?
One of my daughters is a teenager, and so everything I say is dumb. so I have to like socially engineer when I give her advice and make it think it was her idea, which is difficult. So I think there's a period where you can give all the advice you want, but they're just not receptive to it yet. I know I wasn't when I was a teenager. I thought my parents were dumb too. So if I can't directly just say, hey, this is what you should be doing to set your life up for success, I just need to live it. I need to set the example of what successful life looks like based on habits that I instill in my own life. Because at the very least, they can start soaking that up just by osmosis, just by being around me. That's my opinion on that. It's like, it's not that we're not taught early enough. It's sometimes we're just not receptive to it.
Yeah.
Sean? Yeah, what do you think?
Well, when I was young, I don't know whether I was unreceptive or I wasn't taught it. I'm not sure which one it was, but I do know this, that the moment I got off the bus with my greasy long hair on day one of infantry basic training for 6 months, I didn't have much personal accountability. I mean, I had some. I mean, I was captain of the soccer team, I was blah, 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 whatever. And those were just, I didn't understand those as personal accountabilities. I was doing my best. I just didn't understand accountability at that point. But man, the military taught it to me pretty quickly. And by quickly, I mean maybe a year or two, or however long it took for me to understand the term and what it meant for me and what it meant for those around me, and how I had to represent my own personal accountability in the team. And so once I was taught it, I mean, I've never forgot it. And I think that that's a big difference between when you learn it at a young age, it's something that you're supposed to hang on to and reinforce and build on, not be taught it like it was a weekend course and you forget about it because it has no impact on your life. Personal accountability is one of the strongest pillars in my life, as far as I'm concerned, that has taken me probably further than I deserve to go, because I've held myself extremely accountable, not only to myself. I would say that 90% of my accountability has been held to those that I'm serving, or the team that I was in, or the things that I was doing on behalf of others, or things that I was doing for myself, but were there to create examples, as it were, for my kids, to help them understand that consistency of effort and holding myself accountable on the regular should demonstrate their ability to trust in the process. And so I think that trust is a big issue with the personal accountability piece, because if someone is in front of a podium wagging their finger and explaining what personal accountability means all day long, man, I ain't that receptive to it. But you demonstrate it to me on the regular, okay, now I'm interested. I'm interested after you've done it for about a month. And if you've done it for longer than a year, now I'm starting to become a tiny fan of that personal accountability. And if I see it for a decade, now I'm a fan. If you can personally be holding yourself accountable for the world around you, that I dig that. But in the game for a day and flaring out like you're super accountable that day, but not the next day, well, that's a whole different topic, I think.
Yeah. Kag, you got any thoughts on that?
I definitely think that there is a lot of people who have it in them, and then other people who learn it. Like for me, I did not have it at all, but then I learned it when I was in the Marine Corps, and it's like it's amazing the difference of the accountability now as it was before. Because when I was young and I didn't have the experiences that I've had and the external influence that I had, it's definitely like night and day. Those decisions and those accountability, that accountability was definitely different.
Lee, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a whole lot more to add. It's just, personal accountability. It's I was a pretty responsible kid growing up, had more or less straight A's and did the right thing, didn't go partying really at all. But a lot of that was just because of the value system that was instilled in me while I was growing up. And I think, I think that it all goes back to that. It's like, if you're trying to teach somebody accountability, kind of like what Sean was saying, you got to live it. You got to lead by example. And again, that's what I'm trying to do with my kids too. Is all right. If you're not going to listen to me, for example, my dad used to tell me, set up a budget and practice good money practices, but I mean, he wasn't living it. I mean, we always had food on the table, we always had a roof over our head, but I would argue he's not in the best financial position as he could have been had he been a little bit more accountable to himself. I'm trying to change that and actually live it, and not just financially, but like physically, mentally, and emotionally. I try to live by example that I'm pursuing excellence every single day, and as a result, I'm hoping that my kids soak up some of that, and they even if they're not practicing it yet, it's at least been ground into their subconscious a little bit, just by example.
I like that. Any other thoughts on that before I hit some? Okay. So I got another comment from Larry Sutherland here, who we're going to have on the show actually in the next little while. So, which is awesome. So I love that you're watching. He says, when I worked with at-risk youth, I used to share the same concept, the importance of the name. My point was to make sure that they knew they were using their parents' name until they developed theirs. And I really like this because I wanted to ask this question. Do you think that perhaps, I know it's kind of like a chicken before the egg, where personal responsibility is taught to you so that you can teach the next crew, so that you can then, so they can then absorb their own personal responsibility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down the line. But I'm wondering how much it plays into it in terms of the struggles, the difficult, the consequences of negative actions, and how quickly those things are seen, recognized, and then iterated upon. Because there were lots of times that I had a hangover that I was like, well, that was dumb, but I still kept drinking on the next weekend or the next weekend. So there's a point where you go, okay, I just don't want to do that anymore. Or sometimes, the consequences are harsh and they are very difficult to either accept or move forward from. But what are you guys' thoughts on how important it is for those consequences to come home? Sean, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think it comes down to your attitude on how much you can get away with in your life. Maybe that's the best way to put it. And I think that resilience, if you have a certain amount of resilience, let's say it's a 1 out of 10 resilience, if you get hungover and it negatively impacts your workspace the following day, and you kind of just shrug your shoulders because no one's holding you accountable, you can bounce back from that moment to some degree through resilience, but that doesn't mean that you're learning the lesson. And of course, the lesson is, well, don't do that. But if you're not dwelling on the lesson, if you're like, I'm going to just use a term to put the point across. You should beat yourself up a little bit when you screw up. Rather than just giving yourself an instant hallway pass and saying, I'll try better tomorrow. I'll do better tomorrow. I'm just gonna be kind to myself today and hope that I don't do the same thing tomorrow. I don't agree with that. I think you should kind of beat yourself up a little bit. And by beating yourself up, I'll categorize that as not so hard that it destroys you, but it should be hard enough that you feel the mark, you feel the sting, you feel the mistake. Because it's a mistake. And unless you recognize it as such, and unless you treat it accordingly where you feel the sting, then where's the lesson? You'll resiliently bounce back from your hangover to get hungover again the following day. Big deal. That isn't the lesson. That's just being consistently hungover. The only consistency that someone should be pursuing is harshly correcting themselves in the moment for that screw up, and then doing better the following day.
Okay, you got any thoughts?
I agree with that. Absolutely. It's like you definitely need to have that sting. And again, I don't think everybody's going to do the same thing, but it's like I think there's a lot of people who definitely hold themselves accountable more so than others. So that's definitely a good trait to have.
Absolutely. Lee, you got any thoughts?
I think behavior doesn't change, unless the consequences are harsh enough. Throughout high school, I was a serial procrastinator, but I didn't learn not to be a procrastinator because I always got A's, so it's like I never learned my lesson, although life would have been significantly easier if I just did stuff early. But I never experienced a harsh enough consequence to change behavior. And something I tell folks that I work with is sometimes rock bottom is a good thing, because rock bottom inspires drastic change in daily behavior. Oftentimes, I think the danger of kind of navigating through life it can be uncomfortable, but it isn't quite uncomfortable enough to inspire change. And so it's just like, yeah, I'll get hungover this weekend, but partying was fun. So it is what it is. It's like, until you get that DUI or whatever, end up in the county jail for the weekend, maybe that's what is the catalyst that actually changes the behavior. But yeah, I think oftentimes the consequences just aren't severe enough to inspire that change.
Yeah, 100%. I was also a serial procrastinator,
Yeah.
and I say this now, looking back on it, I had the misfortune of being good at stuff. So I could work really hard if I needed to in that moment to get the paper done, and I used to look at this as a win moment for me, right? So I'm going to tell you a little story. At the end of high school, I was sitting at 98 credits. You need 100 to graduate. I had one final left to do. I had an overall average in that class of 47, and my final test was worth 50% of my mark. So I needed a 53 in order to pass and graduate high school, and I got a 53. Now, I used to I used to tell this story as a bit of like I can rise to the occasion when I need to. But the sad part is that I didn't learn until later on was the fact that there was no need for that. All of the stress that I had accrued about, oh my God, I might not graduate, and all of these things about I might not pass this test or this course or blah blah blah. It was unneeded. Had I just put the work in through the year, which wasn't that hard. Like, I didn't find it difficult to do. I just didn't want to. And so it was interesting because after that incident, I started to take a little bit more personal responsibility, but it wasn't enough to like really change my ways. Had I failed, had I like not graduated high school and had to redo grade 12 or do something like that, that would have been quite the sting. And I don't know how that would have affected me, but yeah, sometimes you need to take a shot in the face and like really like remember getting punched in the face.
But you didn't in that case. You actually got a
I did.
hallway pass.
I did. I gave
And
myself the
you-
hallway pass.
Well, you gave yourself the hallway pass, and you know who else gave you a hallway pass? The teacher.
Yeah.
Giving you 53. That's no coincidence. You didn't get a 53. You got a failing mark. They just didn't want you back. That's the system pushing. That's true, man.
Yeah,
That's the
100%.
system pushing incompetence because it doesn't want to deal with the incompetence. And that's how leadership plays out. If someone's doing a bad job or you want to get rid of someone in your empire, you freaking promote them and move them along to the next problem crew. And so you were promoted through incompetence out of high school. And that's an important telling moment because how someone views that moment, you were too young to understand it. But now you do understand it. But I was the same way. I mean, I barely scraped through high school and I've got a pretty high IQ. It's because I wasn't holding myself personally accountable. And that was a massive error. I regret it today. I just didn't understand it in the moment. But now I understand years later that I was a screw up and the system allowed me to screw up because I could have done a whole lot better, but the system didn't hold me accountable. So there's personal accountability and there's systemic accountability. And if the system isn't looking after you and you're not looking after yourself, congratulations, you just got promoted.
You guys got any thoughts on that? Congratulations, you got promoted. Keg, you got any thoughts on that?
I don't think I have any additional thoughts about that.
Okay. I got another couple comments here. Lee, anything? Okay. So
No one wants to touch that one. I thought I'd throw it out there, see if anyone
awesome.
hooked in, you know?
Well, I don't even know how to develop
I
that. It
know.
was such a great point of just like, congratulations, you're promoted. I love that. Comment of the night goes to Sean right there. Julie says, "Good. First off, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Julie." Says, "I agree with Sean. Get a good coach. It's if that's not your thing, then find a mentor or a good leader, someone who is kicking butt in whatever you are trying to master." And that is a great point. And it kind of goes into a little bit more of the question I wanted to talk about a second ago was, Sean, you had mentioned the culture in the States being more open to coaching versus in Canada. And I'm wondering how much that goes into perhaps the competitive nature between Canada versus the US. I know Canadians are thought of as very nice and kind of easygoing, we'll take it as it comes kind of people, and from at least looking south from Canada, Americans are. It's a very competitive culture based off of the free market and all the other things. It's kind of bred into the people. So I'm wondering how much that plays into being coachable or being accepting of external accountability, and similar to getting a good coach. Kag,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Oh, sorry, I thought.
No, I'll come back to you, Sean. Don't worry.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
No worries. So basically the question is, do you think it is a culture of competitiveness that develops someone's ability to be coachable, or do you think it is a more of a personal outlook on it?
I like your comparison between the U.S. and Canada. I really don't think I have a certain opinion, but it's like I think that it's something that's definitely learned. And down here in the States, we are definitely competitive, and growing up from an early age, that's exactly what I was doing. So it's like I think it is definitely learned.
Lee, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we're pretty competitive. But something I've also found is that a lot of people like the idea of being a champion, or like the idea of being special operations. They don't actually want the job or whatever it takes to do X, Y, Z. And so yeah, the competition is great, but when the rubber meets the road and people start to understand what it actually takes to get to that level, you weed out the non-competitive folks pretty quick, I think.
Good point.
Yeah. Sean? Now I'm coming.
Well, I've already established that I do believe, almost factually, that the United States is a more competitive marketplace than Canada in respect to coaches, and in respect to sports, and in respect to performance, and in respect to business. In fact, in respect to everything culturally, the United States is a more competitive entity than Canada. I think it's a good thing. I wish Canada had more of that competitive spirit in it. Now, there's a difference between toxic competitiveness and appropriate competitiveness, which is an entirely different conversation. But to Julie's point, if you can put that point up again,
absolutely.
Chance, thanks. I coached Julie for over a decade, and I've coached her at everything from regional races all the way through to world championships. In fact, I'll be down in Australia in November with Julie to support her at a world championship 24-hour solo mountain bike race. And so she managed to find a coach, me. She managed to find a mentor, me. She managed to find a good leader, me. She managed to find someone kicking butt, me. But now she's doing all of those things herself, beyond me, perhaps. And so I think it's important to recognize that that's what you should be seeking. All of those things that Julie just listed off, if you're looking for a mentor or coach, all of those words in there is what you should be seeking. Now, Julie understands the difference between United States and Canada in respect to competitive coaching or competitive performance, because again, she's been in the game long enough to understand that. What does that mean, though? What does it mean when you've got not a hyper-competitive culture, but a competitive culture versus a less than competitive culture? I think that the United States does a great job in respect to athletes and coaching relationships because, again, to the point that's being made, the United States, you're raised up from an earlier age to be involved with coaches, to meet the expectations of a coaching team, as it were. Whereas in Canada, that is less so. And so there's more reliance on personal accountability when you're coaching a Canadian athlete versus team accountability when you're coaching a United States athlete. I hope that makes sense. Now, is one better than the other? I don't think so. As long as it's a good coach that's coaching both athletes, you can draw the best out of Canada or the United States, understanding the cultural differences or the pros and cons of each athlete on a general basis. So is it important that someone is raised in a competitive coaching environment? I think it's good. I think it is important. I don't think it's obligated or mandatory, But I think that the United States has a better start on things than Canada when it comes to coaching.
Interesting. You guys got any thoughts on that before I move on to some of these other comments? Chris or Chris? There we go. Okay. So we got Celtic Mick jumps in and he says, I'm still learning and improving my resilience. I have to look back on what I've accomplished, but more importantly, I need to look at obstacles in front of me and persevere. Every day is a school day. I really like this. Every day is a school day. That's a great line. I keep getting all these questions from these comments, so I really appreciate all the comments. Everybody, keep them coming. Everything you got, hit them up, hit me up with them. So the question that I have based off of this is being able to look at your mistakes objectively is a skill set, right? Like the challenge is that, oh, bad things happened in the past and you kind of want to forget about them because they were bad. But I'm wondering, what are your guys' thoughts on, in building your own resilience, how important is it to really look at your own mistakes objectively versus with all the emotions tied to it? Lee, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
I had a coach in high school. He was my wrestling coach my senior year, and whenever we lost a match, he would never say, "I'll shake it off. You get him next time." He was like, "No, dwell on it. Remember that feeling." And that was one of the best lessons ever, because even though America might be a little bit more competitive than Canada, we do tend to try to shrug off that pain real quick. And I disagree with that. I think feeling what it feels like to lose and to fail is an important part of the whole growth process. And that's how you change behavior to maximize your potential down the road. So yeah, that's kind of my take on that.
I like that. Okay, you got any points to add?
Yeah, I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors now with this new day and age. Everything is just too soft, and like people are accepting everything. I think that there's definitely a lot more you get from actually dwelling on things and seeing the mistakes you're making and really like own it.
Ownership, I love it. Sean?
Yeah, I agree with those two fellas. I mean, you've got to self-reflect on your performance today, yesterday, a year ago, 10 years ago, 1,000 years ago, depending on how old you are. You've got to self-reflect and you've got to figure out, did you do it well or not? And if you didn't do it well, then you got to hang on to that. You just can't shrug your shoulders and walk on past that moment. You got to stare it in the eye, kick it in the teeth, sort it out, sort yourself out from the moment that you just botched, screwed up, dropped the ball, whatever the case is. Anyone that I've ever worked with as a coach, I freaking hold them accountable. And even on small things, it's not that I make small things into big things for someone who is a noob, because there's too many big things that they're screwing up initially. But once they've been in the process, once they've been with me for a while, the big things start disappearing as problems, but the little things are still problems. And I start treating those little things like big things, because I don't want anyone to misinterpret problems. Problems are problems, small or big. And I won't turn a blind eye to small problems, ever. A small problem is a big problem in my mind. How you do one thing is how you do 1,000 things. And so I'm looking for the devil in the details. I'm getting a little more granular as a coach to make sure that those mistakes are not only not overlooked, but they are not ignored in the sense of sit and dwell on it. Sit and wallow in your loss because you botched it. And if I've got to be really harsh in the moment to make the point so that they can grow out of that lesson, grow into a better version of themselves, well, I'll let them wallow for a while. But that's the trick as a coach, man. When you're holding someone personally accountable, if they're not real good at being accountable to themselves, and let's face it, I wouldn't work with people who are non-accountable. But it's my job to help them understand accountability, and I'll do whatever it takes to make the point.
Like that. Any other thoughts from the Chris's? I'm going to keep going on these comments because they're excellent. But you guys got any thoughts on that? No? Good. Okay. So Salty jumps in. Salty Jinx says, in response to what Lee said, I'm hoping to do the same thing with my son. I'm hoping the discussions and example I'm setting now gives him a better grasp on what it looks like. I think it's a great experiment too. I mean, really, what better way to raise people than to try to keep them accountable to things, right? I think that's a great thing to keep working. Alan jumps on here and says, "No need to sugarcoat it, Sean. Tell us how you really feel." And then this one I want to touch on. This is where we want to go with it. Institutional apathy is the biggest killer of personal accountability. It's rampant within most government or bureaucratic groups. Promote and post, and I've seen this many times within the military and outside. The question I want to ask you guys is how to combat this, and even at a grassroots level, if you're looking around and you're seeing people or you're seeing institutionally that there isn't any accountability, and you start to look at yourself and you're like, I'm not keeping accountability. How do you start? Because as Sean says, when you look around, there's so many big problems. You're like, well, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing these things, and all these other stuff. Where do you begin? What are some tools that people who are just stepping into this realm, who have never entered it before, how do they do that and then build upon it? Okay, I'm going to come to you first.
Figured you come to me first. I'm a little bit stuck right now. I'm just trying to go through my thoughts.
Okay, I'll come back to you.
Thanks.
Lee, what do you think?
Something I heard often was it's good enough for government work, and I used to hate that. I hated that because, in my opinion, kind of like what Sean was saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. Work is a reflection of your character. Whatever the task is, we're sweeping floors or I don't know, practicing a mass cow before a deployment. It's like how you do anything is how you do everything, and so what does that mean? I think it comes down to the 25-meter target. Yeah, there's a lot of big problems, but start with the thing that's right in front of you that's going to kill you the fastest. And maybe that's like, hey, just clean up your room. Like your external space that is surrounding you is a reflection of like what's in your mind, I think. And if it's cluttered, it's a reflection of your thought process. It's a reflection of how you conduct yourself. So things as simple as like tidying up your space or conducting decent hygiene, like showering every day is kind of where that starts. I think it's you got to start with the small stuff. Otherwise the big stuff you want to change, like nobody trusts you to try to change it because you can't even keep yourself to a certain standard, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, what do you think?
I agree with that. I have very little to add other than just an exclamation mark, probably.
There you go. Sean, the exclamation mark. Kag, what do you any thoughts?
I'm sorry. I think I'm going to have to go with that as well.
Roger that. We've got a double exclamation mark.
No exclamation mark. Big time.
There you go. Dropped the mic on that one there,
Yeah.
Chris. Awesome. So Salty Drinks continues on. He says, when I say institutional apathy, I mean in check policies and processes that remove choice and personal investment. And I think this is true. This is another quote that I heard a lot alongside it's good enough for government work was, if you want to solve the military's problems, ask a corporal. And at the time, I thought it was hilarious. Like, yeah, of course we can solve all the problems. But it's that entire viewpoint is outside of personal responsibility or personal accountability because they don't know all the problems. They don't know why the problem. They only see the big problems. They can't see all the little problems that become that big problem. So I think that's a part of it. I'm just trying to work my thoughts here, but in terms of resilience, let's go back to this resilience piece because it is Resilience Week. What do you think the biggest link between personal accountability and resilience is? Like, what is the one thing that you can do, I guess, let me put it this way, the one thing you can do right now to build upon your resilience through accountability? And I'm going to go to Sean first.
Sure. I think that they're tied at the hip. They can't be separated. They are one and the same, as it were. You can't have resilience without personal accountability. And you'll never gain personal accountability unless you start facing some adversity to create some resilience. I think that to test yourself, that's what life is a test. And if you want to do the multiple choice test that's super simple, well, that's a different style of life than writing a PhD test, which is, again, a completely different way of living your life. I hold myself to a high standard in all the things that I do. And it's not an easy life, but it's a valuable life. I feel that you push yourself every day to see what you're capable of, not only for yourself, but to demonstrate to others that they too can push themselves and become better through that effort. Resilience isn't created in a vacuum. It requires friction. And friction comes about through adversity. And adversity comes through holding yourself personally accountable. If every day you shrug your shoulders at every tiny little problem and say, that's not my problem, you've got no personal accountability. If you walk past a problem that isn't your problem and you look at it and think, I'm going to fix that, that's mega personal accountability. And so I think it comes down to how you view the world. Is it a multiple choice question that you can do in 3 minutes, or is it a PhD that's going to take you the rest of your life?
I like that a lot. Keg, thoughts?
I tell you what, I go back to the fact that I am beholden to all the people that I serve, and if I want to maintain my reputation and lead those people, I got to make sure I maintain my resilience. Sorry.
No, it's all good. Lee?
I think resilience is one's ability to bounce back from adversity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, the fastest way to bounce back when it hits the fan. I had to put my filter on for a second.
A little bit of accountability right there. I like it.
Right. When it hits the fan, being able to bounce back is I think very closely related to the kind of habits and routines you've set in your life, which comes back to that accountability piece. Like, yeah, this plan did not pan out. Things went sideways as soon as we got boots on the ground. So, all right, go back to the basics. And it's like, all right, I'm going to attack this next thing, this next step, and ensure that my next action is in accordance to my value system. And a lot of that comes down to like habit and routine. And it's like, no matter what, I make my bed, or no matter what, I brush my teeth in the morning. They seem simple and they seem maybe insubstantial, but I disagree. I think they're rather significant because one's ability to bounce back from adversity, I think, is really tied to your ability to get back on track as fast as possible. And I think that's really comes down to like the habits you've established in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an interesting thought process, and I love this. It's been a great conversation. We're just about at time here. I'm going to hit a couple of these last comments, and then we will do some final thoughts. Anything before I jump into that, though, real quick? Any other points to add on? Good? Okay. So KH jumps in here. He says, just a thought. Compounded accountability equals compounded resilience. I really like that as well. Salty says, you want to learn personal responsibility, pick one thing and fix it. When you're good at that one thing, start the next one. As you build or fix each thing, you become accountable for yourself, and each step you take builds your resolve and resilience as you accept more accountability for your actions and self when no one's looking. Thanks, Salty. We're going to end the show right there. You hit all the points. That was awesome. But let's get some final thoughts on this. I'm going to start with Lee, and I'll work our way down. Final thoughts on personal accountability and resilience in general.
Yeah. Again, I think resilience is one's ability to bounce back from adversity, and that the fastest way to do that is to have established a routine and establish healthy habits in your life already. So do that.
Yeah. Kag, what do you think?
There's some people on here that was making comments about they're trying to implement this into their own life. So hopefully they got something out of what was talked about today and took some of the things that we, were able to do, to make possible. And you guys, wish you guys all the best.
Outstanding. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, personal accountability. I think today, go find some friction and address it. whatever that friction looks like in your life. Clean up your room, make your lunch for the first time, whatever it is. The thing that's freaking you out, the thing that's scaring you, the thing that you're procrastinating in, the thing that you don't want to do, those are the things that you have to do. Those are the things that create the resilience in the moment, which improves your personal accountability. I think what I'd like to leave everyone with is, well, why bother? Why even work on yourself? Why even make an effort? Well, if you can't do it for yourself, then do it for the team. Do it for your family that's around you. Do it for your friends. Do it for the neighborhood. Do it for your city. Do it for the world. If you can't do it for you, do it for something else other than yourself. And if you do stay in the game consistently, holding yourself accountable, eventually you'll be able to look backwards and see the long-term success path that you created for yourself. And hopefully that long-term success, whatever that means to you, will have influenced others to understand that they too can have long-term success in their life over the long haul.
Yeah. The not to put a fine point on that, but one of the things that I was looking back on recently was episodes of The Collective, as I've been doing over the last little while, uploading them onto Spotify. And one of the things that I came across was Dorito bag slippers. And I could not help but laugh about that. We had this whole conversation as, that when you look down in the morning and you're wearing Dorito bag slippers, maybe it's time to take some personal accountability, right? And I think that is 100%. If you have to kick off your Dorito bag slippers in the morning to get through your stuff, maybe it's time to take some personal accountability. And I think that is a lesson that you need to learn. As with everybody, it is a lesson that you need to learn, and it only comes when you're ready to build upon your own accountability. That way you can grow into the person that you're meant to be. And you can do that with us every day here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.
Good.